Sometimes we live like we think we're never going to die. I mean, often we live that way, don't we? We give very little thought to the reality that, yeah, we are going to die someday. Um, we think we have all the time in the world, don't we? But I believe, as we put on the tombstone here, we should live like you are dying, because you are. We're all going to die. That's a great thought, isn't it, as we begin the message today? But we should live like we're dying, like we're going to die. Some people are given these warnings due to a health diagnosis or a terminal illness that, well, you probably don't have much time left. And even in that case, though, you very well may die sooner than you think. It is often unexpected when people die, sad to say. We've had some very unexpected deaths here in this church since I've been here, and we've had some that were not unexpected, were kind of normal. But you're going to die, I'm going to die, we're all going to die. This is a very encouraging sermon after we get past that point. We don't know when it's going to be, and some people live longer than others, but eventually we are all going to die. Some live longer, some less. But no matter how well you take care of yourself, what a healthy diet you eat, or how much you exercise, sorry, Frank, and Dimitri, no matter how much you exercise, well, we're still going to die. Doesn't matter how many miracle supplements you swallow every day that are supposed to extend your life, how many pills will you take and all that stuff, we're still going to die. And it might be sooner than we think. Today's sermon is titled, Live Like You Are Dying. Tim McGraw has a song that's very close to that in title, Live Like You Were Dying. And in that song, he has these lines. I'm just going to read part of it. It's what this man did when he was in the song. It's a story about when somebody was told that he probably doesn't have long to live, how he might respond. And they asked him how he responded. And this is the good part of what he said. He says, I loved deeper, and I spoke sweeter, and I gave forgiveness I'd been denying. And he said, someday I hope you get the chance to live like you were dying. I'll play that song for you at the end of the service. I won't sing it, but we'll just put it on the screen later. As I was growing up, attendance at funerals for members of my family was mandatory. I don't know if you know, I think you know what I mean. I had to go. When somebody in the family died, everybody had to attend the funeral. I attended family funerals from a very young age. It didn't matter how closely related we were. It didn't matter if I didn't even know that family member. I was supposed to go to the funeral. And it's almost not a joke to say in West Virginia, I was related to most of the people that I knew. And we also, in my family, we considered people from our church to be family. Like, anybody in the church was just like a family member and sometimes closer than a family member. But often when I went to the family funerals, I would meet a family member that I didn't even know. I can't recall meeting. In Ecclesiastes 7:2, it says, it's better to go to the house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting, for death is the destiny of every man. The living should take this to heart. So the Bible is saying it's good to go to funerals. We're kind of getting away from that, aren't we? And COVID made it difficult too. Some people never attend funerals, but I think he's saying we should go and we should pay our respects to the dead and to the family members who are still living. But also we should go because being in the presence of death reminds us we're going to die. And you should not be afraid to take a child to a funeral. Death is a fact of life that we must all live with. Death reminds us of our own mortality, and it is good to be reminded of your mortality. The Bible speaks about the brevity of life, that it goes by quickly, and it seems to go faster the older you get. Now, the Bible doesn't say that, but I've heard lots of people say it, and I believe it's true. It seems to go faster the older you get. James 4:13 through 17. Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. Why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast and brag. All such boasting is evil. Anyone, then, who knows the good he ought to do and doesn't do it, sins. So life is brief. The average life expectancy in the U.S. has went down in the last 3 years. The average life expectancy is now 76.1 years. The average life expectancy for women is 79.1, and for U.S. men, it is 74.2. That doesn't sound like very much when you're 62. That means if some of you have already lived an above average life, right? Many have already lived an above average life. And if you're young, that might seem like a long time, but when you're past 60, on the average, you don't have much time left. At 61, I'm 13 years away from the average lifespan. I hope to live longer than the average, but I don't know. Psalm 90:10 says, the length of our days is 70 years or 80, if we have the strength. Yet their span is but trouble and sorrow, for they quickly pass and we fly away. So what the Bible said many years ago is actually still kind of accurate for the age range in which they say the average U.S. person lives. You have a shorter lifespan in Mexico and a higher lifespan in Canada, but in the U.S., it's not that far. But it's between 70 and 80, right? We live about 70 years, more or less, is what Psalm 90:10 says. And after he passed 70, my father used to say, well, son, I guess I'm living on borrowed time. Because I got my 70, and he'd say that because that's what the King James said in Psalm 90:10. It didn't say 70 years, it said 70, which is 70. A score is 20. And the older you get, I said earlier, the faster it seems to go, and it also gets easier to lose track of time. I've really noticed this too, like when some people get very old, it seems like one of the things they lose is the ability to keep track of time and to make appointments on time, like maybe to come an hour early instead of an hour late, just different things. Like the concept of time is more difficult when so much of it has passed. You know, when you've lived through so much time, the concept and keep track of it, it's hard to keep track of it. But also, as you get older, I think then we realize how brief life really is. Because you can remember something that happened 60 years ago like it was yesterday, but you might have trouble remembering what you had for breakfast this morning. I think we can only appreciate the brevity of life, or, well, not really only, but I think we can appreciate it more the closer we get to the end. That it's just brief. And you should not assume that you're going to be here tomorrow. And that means what you need to do it today. Proverbs 27:1 says, do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring forth. Well, that verse is saying, we had it from James, life is brief. And from Proverbs we have, life is uncertain. You don't know about tomorrow. You never know how long you have. And things so often don't turn out the way we plan. We make our plans, but sometimes It doesn't happen. Quite often, it doesn't happen. I got a lesson in the uncertainty of life in 2009. I was 48 years old, and I was having pain or pressure in my chest. And I asked my doctor, could you schedule me for a stress test? And he thought, well, okay, I'll schedule you for a stress test. And they did. And the good thing was, after he scheduled me for the stress test, it was out there ways. They called me like a couple of days later and said, we have a cancellation in 2 days. Can you come in? And I did. It was a good thing. They got me in early due to the cancellation because I took the test and I thought, that wasn't too bad. I did pretty well. But then when I finished the test, they sent me to the hospital to talk to the cardiologist who does the catheterizations. And he said, you know why they sent me to you, don't you? You flunked your test. I thought I did pretty well. He said, no, you didn't do pretty well. They don't send people straight to the hospital to see me who do pretty well. And so they did the catheterization, and that was like just a few days later. Like on the Sunday before, I was having chest pain at church that Sunday. And then Tuesday, I had my stress test. And then on Thursday, I believe it was, I went into the hospital for the catheterization. And they found a near complete blockage in one major artery, which they opened with that angioplasty thing, and then they put a stent in there. And after the surgery, I didn't know what the doctor said happened, really, because I was still under the influence, but he talked to me later and he said that was what we call a widowmaker blockage. But we fixed it up for you. And I can say, praise God, I've done well since that stent. I take the medication I'm prescribed to take, and I successfully completed my most recent stress test, I believe July of this year. Not certain. Yeah, I think, July of this year. I have to do one every 2 years because of my bus driving job. But an experience like that makes you realize your own mortality. My doctor had no tact. He says to my wife and I, well, we're going to do the stress test, and I want you to know that you could die on the table. Not the stress test. We're going to do the catheterization. We want you to know you could die on the table. And I hear right beside of me because it was like shocking and surprising to hear that come out. Then when he saw her response, he says, but it doesn't happen very often. He tried to cover for it a little bit. But when you realize your own mortality, then I think what you should do is make sure that you tell your spouse you love them every day. Because they might not be alive tomorrow, and you might not be alive tomorrow. Make sure that you communicate your love and appreciation to others while you have the opportunity every day. That's what you call living like you're dying. And I think that I should not presume that I'm going to have the average lifespan of 74.2 years. And I just said earlier, I hope to live longer than that. But I should not presume I'm even going to get the average, because if that's the average, a lot of people die before that, right? The Bible says you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. So we're presumptuous if we assume that we have all the time that we need to do all the things that we should and want to do. And we're presumptuous if we think, I'll do that when I get around to it. I don't know that I'll have good health or prosperity or even a place to live tomorrow. We could all be subject to lose all those things in a single day. And I know you say, well, I own my own house. That doesn't mean it's not going to burn down, does it? Doesn't mean we're not going to have a flood, or doesn't mean we're not going to have a hurricane. This part of the country, that doesn't happen very often, but it does. It could. But we should be planning for eternity. In Luke 12, 16 through 20, Jesus told this parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you prepared for yourself? So if you're planning on cranking up that recliner and sitting in it for the next 20 years, it might not work. We can plan our retirement years before we die and before we retire. And it's not wrong to plan for the future. But we also must be prepared for eternity, and that was Jesus' point in the parable. You need to be making sure that you're prepared for eternity. And if you die tonight, what happens to your IRA? Well, if you've got a good spouse, it goes to them, right? Hopefully. I mean, we take some comfort in that someone in their family may receive an inheritance, but money in the bank will do nothing for the dead person. That is, you or me. Another principle about death is that death is sure. Hebrews 9:27. And as it is appointed unto men once to die, but after this the judgment. You and I have an appointment with death. It's established. It's set. You're going to die someday. We don't get to set the time and the day and the date. I love to put stuff on my calendar. I have a Google Calendar that I keep on my phone and on my iPad, on my computer. I can check that calendar, and if it ain't on the calendar, it don't count. You know, like my wife says, but where do I said, is it on the calendar? Something that's not on my calendar is I'm going to die today. That's never been on my calendar. And I can't, because I don't know when it's going to be. Do you? You don't either. But he says, after death comes the judgment. That's an appointment too that we can't avoid. As believers, we are grateful that we will stand before the judgment seat of Christ. And that is not a judgment that determines in or out, because it's already determined for the believer in Christ. We're in. We're going to make it. But it does determine something about rewards and eternity. What we'll be doing in eternity, what gifts we will have, what rewards we will have. Unbelievers, sadly, stand before the great white throne judgment, and they will be cast into an eternal fire after that judgment. I think it was in a book by Francis Chan where I read something where he says, life is like a movie about God in which we have a tiny bit part. And you might think the movie's all about you, but it's all about God. Imagine if you had this tiny little part in a movie and you invited all of your friends to come and watch a biographical movie about which you're the star. And they come to the theater and they see you in one brief line say, it's all about me. But it wasn't about you at all, and that was your only appearance in the film. Life is not about you. It's about God. He's the creator and sustainer of life. It's not about me. It's not about you. It's about him. I need to get over myself. You need to get over yourself, because it's not about us. It's about God. 1 Corinthians 10:31 says this, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God. We should live for God. I want to ask you this. If you knew this is your last day on this earth, would you do things differently? You'd be stupid not to, wouldn't you? Would you give longer hugs? Would you tell people that you love them? Would you call some people that you haven't talked to lately? Listen, you might die today. This could be your last day. Some people do get a warning that they have a disease that will kill them. In 2014, I was here. My father was told that summer that he would die of congestive heart failure in a matter of months. He did. He was in the hospital, and they said, if you want, you can go to a hospice house where you will be cared for until your death. But instead, he went home because he wanted to die at home. And my mother's just like that. I mean, no, it was not any question. She would want him to be at home. And wouldn't you like to die at home if you had your choice instead of in a hospital? Sure, I think we all would. So he went home because that's where he wanted to die. He chose to die. Hospice nurses began visiting his home, my parents' home, on a weekly basis. And the members of his immediate and extended family, so many, just came by to visit him during that time he was home. And something happened. I'm glad that the God gave us this opportunity, but knowing that he was going to die caused my father to change, and it caused us to change too. He became more vocally and physically loving with his friends and family, and they in return became more vocally and physically loving with him. I want to say he lived like he was dying. He had for 3 months, I think about June to September at home. He lived like he was dying. When you know your time is limited, you focus on what's important, don't you? Showing love, speaking love are the primary important things. There could be no better last words than these three. I love you. I mean, you think about it. If you had a choice and you said, what was the last thing I said to my husband before he died? I love you. That would be the words you would choose if you could. What was the last thing I said to my wife? I love you. What was the last thing I said to my father? I love you. I remember when my grandmother was ill and dying, I didn't run down to see her, but I said, well, the last time I saw her, I told her I loved her, you know. And my father died in September of 2014. Jesse's father, my father-in-law, he died of congestive heart failure in September of 2021, 7 years and a week after my dad died. Like my father, he was terminally ill. And like my father, he said, and his daughter, Gail, who was living with him, said, you're coming home. You know, I want to go home. What do you want to do? I want to go home. And I have one precious memory of my father-in-law sick in his bed, barely able to get out, or maybe not even able to get out, I guess, really. And several of my children, I don't know if we were all there, but several of my children and I were in the bedroom with him. And he was grandpa to me, although he was daddy to my wife. He was grandpa to me because my kids always called him grandpa. And we had a kid the first year we were married, so basically most of the time I knew him, he was grandpa. And we were all gathered around the bed, we were talking, and I don't remember what all we talked about. He had some trouble speaking, but he said loudly and clearly and emphatically to all of us, me and my children were there, and he said, I love you. And then he put up his hand and he said, I love you all. Just like that. Now, most of us don't get that warning that we have weeks or months to live. We might die tomorrow, but we don't know. But if you did know, you might do or say things differently in your final days. Well, here's a great piece of advice for people who don't know when they're going to die, which is most of us. You don't have to know you're dying soon to be a more kind and loving person. Right? You don't have to be dying to be a kind and loving person. If a terminal diagnosis would cause us to be different, why not just be different without that diagnosis? Why not just be different anyway? Today, live like you're dying, because you are. Acts of service demonstrate your love for others. So do those things that serve others. Find ways to serve your family, your loved ones, and even people you don't know. Do acts of service. And regularly say those words, I love you. Now, I think maybe I'd have said about my family growing up, when I reflect on it, when I say those words, I love you, that's not something we do. Everybody knows we love them. We don't have to talk about it. Listen, don't assume anybody knows you love them if you've never told them. Because if you love them, you should tell them, and tell them often. I wish my parents had talked about it more when I was a child. I wish I'd have heard those words more when I was a child. And I think maybe a lot of us feel that way. They did get around to telling me eventually, yes. But it took time and effort, but we got there. And I think the grandchildren helped them to tell me that they love me, because they had to start saying it to the grandkids when them cute little kids say, I love you, Papa. I love you, Mama. They start saying it back, Then when this, grumpy son says, I love you, Mom, they say, I love you too. Or I tell my dad on the phone, I love you, and he'd say, yeah, me too. Just to get those 3 words out was pretty tough. Where I came from, it was anyway. I don't know why. But if you have trouble saying the words, I love you, I'll tell you something you can try, okay? Go home and look in the mirror and say it to yourself. Just practice on yourself. Say, I love you. And look yourself in the eye, in the mirror, and say, I love you. And then you get comfortable with the words coming out of your mouth, and guess what? It won't kill you. It won't hurt you at all. And once you get comfortable saying it in the mirror, then you take a moment and go look your spouse in the eyes and say, I love you. Just look them right in the eyes. Lock eyes and say, I love you. And you practice that, and guess what? It gets easy. It might not be easy if you've never done it, and if nobody ever said it to you like you would like, but you do it often, and it will become easy. As easy as saying goodbye and hello to people you love. I love you. I'd like us to keep these 2 things in mind at the end of every day. Ask yourself, well, hey, did I do or say something kind or loving for somebody else today? Was there an act of kindness? Was there words of kindness from me toward someone else today? And secondly, did I say those words, I love you, to somebody that I love today? Those 2 habits. Did I do an act of kindness toward someone or say kind words to someone? Number 1. Number 2, did I say the words I love you today? Those 2 habits will help you to really live like you're dying, because you don't know if you'll have the chance later. You don't know if you'll have tomorrow. You don't know if they'll have tomorrow. Tomorrow may never come for some of us. So be kind and loving today. That's what I mean by live like you are dying.